Array lists. Array lists are objects that are used to store a list of other objects. They're very useful for storing different types of objects, especially in big quantities. You can create an array to store objects, but once the array is created, its size is fixed. So to stretch or shrink it is kind of hard. But Java provides the ArrayList class, which can be used to store an unlimited number of objects. Array lists are known as generic classes, and they have a generic type E. So here is a standard form of array list shown right here. Ooh, some bad pencil. Okay, so generic type, and this is how you would write a typical array list to create a new array list. So what you have is you have an array list, so it tells the computer that you're trying to create an array list. It tells you the type that you're trying to put into this array list. So in this case, it would be a string type, and you need to give the array list a name. So the name here is shown to be cities. New to tell the computer to create this new array list. And then you need to say array list once again, and also give the type. So that's kind of a duplicate of the front. And finally, there are these parentheses, which are typically used to hold the parameters or the size of a regular array. But in an array list, you can leave it empty. And of course, you have to make sure to add that semicolon at the end. There are many different things you can do with the ArrayList class. So the ArrayList class, simply you can add an array list and parentheses, and that creates an empty list. So shown right here, that's basically what we just did. There's also an add method. This add method adds a new element, E, so this could be a string, an int, any type of thing, at the end of this list. So element E at the end of this list, and it returns a void. So one example of this would be, let's say we have an array list of 1, 2, 3, all right? And we have this number 4 that we want to add to this array list. Well, all you have to do is you just add 4 to the index that follows. So 1 is at index 0, 2 is at index 1, blah, blah, blah. And at index 3, which is not available yet, you would add number 4 into it, and it automatically creates sort of a new array list that puts the 4 in with all the remaining elements that came before it. So there's the add method. Add can also be used to add a new element E at a specified index in the list. So there's a special index tool at an int. So for example, let's say I wanted to squeeze 4 in right here. So I could write it as 1, 2, 4, 3. And it will automatically add a new element E at the specified index in this list. So right here, it would be index 2, and it would shift everything else down the line. All right, there's also a contains method. This returns true if the list contains the element O. So this is generally beneficial in checking for a certain value you need. So if you need to check for like the number 3 or check for the letter I or whatever, this is when you would use contains. And it returns back a Boolean, which tells you if it found it or not. There's also a get method. This returns the element from the list at the specified index. So let's say I want to get whatever is at index 2 currently, so that would be 4, and it would return 4 to me. There's also index of, so pretend you want to figure out 4, so you do index of, the object right here would be 4, and then it would tell you the index where it came from, which is 2. And it returns an int, because of course it has to tell you which index it comes from. There's also a remove. The remove removes the element 0 or O from the list, rather, and it returns true if the element is removed. So this is a Boolean case again. It returns true or false, and it tells you what exactly you're trying to remove, and it also removes that thing for you. But once you remove it, the indexes shift. So let's say I want to take out 4 in this case. So I just scratch out 4, and then 4 is taken out, and it returns true because it found that element and removed it. But one thing to watch out for is that the elements shift down 1. So originally it was 0, 1, 2, 3. Well, now 4 is gone, so now the new indexing is 0, 1, and 3, which used to be index 3, now becomes index 2, back to like what it was originally. You can also use the size method. This returns the number of elements in this list. So if you have an array list, like list, if you do list.size, you can very easily get how big the list is. This is very beneficial when you're writing loops and you don't want to go out of bounds. There's also a remove at a certain index, so this is kind of like the remove above, except this time it finds the certain index you want to give it and it removes it and it returns Boolean, whether it removed it or not. So in this case, if I wanted to remove what's at index number 2, I just put remove 2 and it will take 3 and it will remove 3 for me. And finally, there's the very important set. Set takes in a certain index where you want to set a certain value, and it adds that value. So let's say I want to add 4 to index 0. So it will set the element at the specified index of 0 right here to be 4. So it would get rid of the 1, or rather it would turn it into a 4. And then it would look like this. Set is basically known as replace. And some important thing to realize is that of an object type, you can't use a regular primitive data type such as int to replace a generic type. So when you're writing a new array list, what goes in between these two less than greater than signs has to be storing objects. So one object would be the integer object, which is basically the same as int, except it's an actual object and not a primitive data type. So you would want to put integer in here so the computer can read it. And other types of objects include strings and other different objects that you could put in there, as long as it's not a primitive data type. Well, why would you exactly use an array list? There are many reasons to use an array list, because it has a lot of benefits over a traditional array. So like a traditional array, you can create an array, you can access an element, you can update an element, and you can also return the size. Except in an array list, the ways to get it is a little bit different. You have to use actual methods instead of actually using brackets or different commands like .length to access certain values. And the creation is also a little bit different, just a little bit. They're pretty similar though. But the benefits of the array list really come when you have all these extra things on the bottom, where you can add a new element, insert a new element, remove elements, and so many other things that an array cannot easily do. Sure, you can write a regular array and then change everything, and then create a new array and add your new values or delete your values or insert your values, but it's much easier to do so with an array list. The array list has other methods that an array simply does not have. For example, as we mentioned previously, add a certain thing, remove certain thing, and also even clear all the elements in the array list. Array list contains many default methods, many of which are useful, simply that the array, the regular array, does not have. Just like regular arrays, you can traverse the elements in an array using different types of loops. One is, of course, the for each loop. The elements in an array list are kind of just like the elements in a regular array, and they can be traversed using a for each loop using the following syntax, which is basically just the same for each loop we've been accustomed to doing. And this is good because it quickly and simply goes through the whole array list. But sometimes you want to limit your parameters. You might not want to traverse through every single index in the array list, or you might want to start at a different place, not 0. In that case, you can use the traditional for loop, which is like this. And you would start at index whatever you need to start at, and you could end at whatever index you start at. So this is kind of like the for each loop, a for loop I wrote right here. You start at 0, and then eventually you want to end at list.size. So normally we might do like the last value, the last index, like the length or something. But since this is an array list, you want to do the dot size to get the max parameter that the array list has. So the dot size method is one thing that is different from a traditional array. So it's basically the same, and this is also a way to traverse through the loop and set different values if you ever need to, or insert, delete different values. And using indexing, as shown here, is a lot simpler sometimes than actually going through every element in this array list. One final small thing, this generally isn't important on the AP exam, but for coding from scratch or writing your own shells and stuff, you need to make sure to import the ArrayListz class and method. So what you do is you simply do import java.utility.ArrayListz. So this is kind of like different variables we have, but in this case, you're not importing a variable, you're importing the ArrayListz class. You have to do this because the ArrayListz is in a non-imported library. It's in the Java API, but it's not automatically loaded because that would take more space and time. So if you ever want to use an ArrayListz and you're not actually writing the methods and class headers, you just write the whole shell, the whole program, please make sure to add this import at the front to make sure that the computer knows that you are going to use an ArrayListz.